History likes to label her as a sidekick, but as we often are learning, history doesn't always get it right. And it's no different for this hot-tempered old pro. Hello, my name is Summer, and this is Paying For It.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I'm gonna turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, want you to shade and dry.
Welcome to episode 7. Thank you for being here. I hope you all had a wonderful Valentine's Day, and I hope whether you spent it loving yourself or loving each other, I just hope you had fun doing it, if you're into that sort of thing. Since today is a Valentine's episode, I had to do something fun. So as you can see, if you're watching the video version, I have just the cutest sunglasses on right now, and I feel like I'm such a vibe, to be honest. I've just embodied the Valentine's Day spirit. If you haven't already considered subscribing to see the video versions, you should. If not for this awesome fit, then the awesome photos that I dig out of the deep, deep web. So if you haven't, please consider subscribing or just at least following or leaving a review. It means a lot. With that being said, grab yourself a cocktail, a mocktail, a coffee, or whatever you fancy, and let's get into it. Today I have a coffee. I was gonna make a Valentine's Day cocktail. This is actually my second time recording this, but the first time I had an awesome cocktail that I recorded. I was gonna put up on TikTok and everything, but then I decided I wasn't the biggest fan of the first recording of this episode, so here we are on a different day, a different feeling, and a different drink. So yeah, I've made myself a copycat version of Dutch Bros caramelizer, just not frozen, and yeah, with a soft top. So let's get into it. Cheers. Okay, let's see how far I can get into this episode with these glasses, because they're badass, but they turn everything red. And I have just switched over on a different way to present my own script myself. Thank you, Canva, for being awesome and turning a doc into a slideshow. It's awesome. And it's a fun way for me to see the visuals I pull out while recording. Often when mentioning this queen, she is referred to most of the time as a sidekick. Others say the love interest, or we can't forget just one of the many soiled doves who just so happened to attach herself to a notorious gambler. But this fiery queen would have made history with or without her man. I am very excited to introduce this badass who drank, shot guns, and fended for herself, and help be part of taking back her history, because her story deserves to be told right along with those who she ran with, not just as a side character. Let me introduce you to Mary Catherine Hornery, or as history knows her, Big Nose Kate. Born Mary Catherine Hornery in Hungary on November 7th, 1850, Mary was the second oldest daughter to parents Michael Hornery and Catherine Boldizer. Michael was born in Budapest in 1817. He would go on to become a doctor and was so successful he had been appointed as the personal surgeon of Mexico's Empire Maximilian in 1862. The Hornerys would go on to have 8 children, though some reports did say up to 11. So I'm not quite sure, but they had a lot of kids. When he gets appointed to be Maximilian's doctor, they move from Hungary to Mexico. Married life started out again with what looked to be moving towards a very promising future in a proper society. But we already know, if we're here talking about her, then something threw her off course. Maximilian, I hope I'm saying his name right. Maximilian has an interesting history as well. He was sent to Mexico by the French to basically help overthrow the Mexican government. And he went there and ran his empire up until around the time the U.S. Civil War ended on April 9th, 1865. The American government was definitely still reluctant to enter a conflict with the French, but they still remained supportive of the Mexican president, Benito Juarez. And the U.S. refused to recognize the empire and wouldn't acknowledge or respond to any of Maximilian's correspondence. Then, in December of 1865, Juarez was able to secure a $30 million private American loan, which we all know when it comes to war, money is basically money is power. I guess not even just when it comes to war. When it comes to life, money is power. So when he was able to secure that much money, it changed the course of Maximilian's empire, causing Maximilian's empire to go into decline. And on May 5th, 1867, his empire fully fell. And the next day, he was captured in an attempt to flee back to France. June 13th, his trial starts, and a day later, he was found guilty of conspiring to overthrow the Mexican government, and on June 17th, 1867, he was executed by a firing squad. After Maximilian's rule crumbles, the Hornery family has to flee Mexico. This was a dangerous time for them because they were not on the right side of history at the moment. So for them, the fastest and safest place to go was the U.S. The family settles in Davenport, Iowa. In Iowa, Michael's plan is to continue practicing medicine and provide for his family. However, on March 26th, 1865, tragedy hits the family. At age 14, Mary loses her mother. Before they can even process the death of their mother, though, 2 months later, in May 1865, their father passes away, changing the course of Kate and all of her siblings' life, of course. They go on to get placed in a foster home. In 1867, Mary and 4 of her siblings ends up in the home of a man named Otto Skimmett, who becomes the guardian of the Hornery children, or at least 4 of them. I don't know where the rest of them went. I mean, if they only had 8, 4 of them are missing. Where did they go? But I guess they might have just gotten placed in a different foster home. Anyways, so Skimmett, he was a farmer, and he immediately put the kids to work. He was extremely strict and used any excuse to be physically abusive to the children. So this was a huge different lifestyle than Mary and her siblings were used to. When you are born to a very prominent doctor, you're not used to this kind of lifestyle, this kind of farm, like wake up at dawn and you work until death. It was a different lifestyle, and the person they were placed with wasn't the nicest. One day, Otto Skimmett attempts to rape Mary. She luckily manages to escape the attack using an axe, and she ends up hitting him in the head with the handle, knocking him unconscious. Of course, at 15, she is terrified. Who wouldn't be? She's terrified for her life and afraid of what will happen when he wakes up. She did the only thing that she could really do, and that was run away. I mean, at this point, she's 15, he's already physically abusive, and then he tries to rape her. And if she stays and he wakes up, he either is going to possibly still continue to try to rape her, or worse, and kill her. It was not a good thing for her, so she had to leave. That was really her only option. Before we move on, I just wanted to, I know it was like in the 1800s and things were different, but like, was this guy married? Like, how did they get placed in his care? I'm assuming he was single, and like just this farm dude who went out and adopted 4 children to use for labor, and then just happened to find out that one of them is like a female and like getting to that age where she's attractive, and he's just like, oh well, I've adopted her, so like I can't. Anyways, I'm sorry, I just had to point that out. I just don't understand what was wrong with the world even back then, where just some random man can adopt 4 children to put to work on his farm, and then he just feels like they're his property and he can do what with them he feels right. Ugh, gross. Sorry. So moving on. With no money and no family to turn to, she had no real means of survival. She had to rely on what she does have, and that was her brain. For the first half of her life, she was educated due to her dad's status. This was something for a woman that was not an easy feat, as most girls didn't get access to education, and if they did, it was to go to something called a dame school, which was a school that was basically ran by a local woman for a small fee. A lot of the times, girls would mostly be taught housework and stuff like knitting and sewing. So that's lovely for us girls. Mary, though, had access to a formal education, so she was very intelligent for her age. Mary, though, wasn't just brainy. She was tough and mentally strong. Of course, she wasn't willing to let life eat her alive. She makes her way to the Mississippi River, which is about 4.5 hours drive nowadays from where she was in Davenport. Yeah, I don't know how long it would take her to get there in the 1800s, but I'm assuming longer than 4.5 hours. The river docks are a bustling place, full of boats, boat crews, fur trappers, gamblers, and traders. In other words, just full of men who most, if not all, would no doubt take advantage of a vulnerable young girl by herself. Mary, though, somehow manages to sneak her way onto Ulysses' steamship. So she manages to escape all these men and just like this dangerous situation that she's on, sneaks onto a steamboat headed somewhere, and just crosses her fingers she doesn't get caught. Unfortunately for her, or fortunately for her, Captain Bullington Fisher soon finds her hiding on his ship before it embarks on its journey. Mary attempts to lie to him and make up a story on why she's on his ship. When he doesn't believe her, because she's like making up all these like lies, she has no other choice but to come clean to him. She tells him her story and that she was just trying to make it to St. Louis, where she hopes to live in the nun convent that is there. Fisher decides to let her stay and to protect her on this leg of her journey. Becoming her protector, it wasn't long before the two become lovers. Now, she's still 15, mind you, and I don't know how old this captain was, but I still want to say you, even though, like, I do believe that it was something she willingly got involved in, because it was almost like, I would say she kind of like fell for him because he was probably the first person since embarking on this journey of just being alone that was kind to her. And it wasn't, the way it seems is that Captain Fisher didn't say, oh, you can only stay if you sleep with me. That doesn't seem like that was the case. It seems like he was willing to let her stay and protect her through the journey, and then it evolved into a romantic relationship thereafter. So take with that as you will. Hate Captain Fisher, don't hate Captain Fisher, whatever you feel. But love making happened between the two. Why did I say it that way? Anyways, where were we? This is also when Mary becomes officially Kate Fisher, making this the first time she will take on a new identity. Not the last time, though. Adoring her captain enough to take on his name kind of makes me think that she didn't hate him. Okay. So arriving at the St. Louis, Captain Fisher helps Kate get into the Ursuline convent, and that's the last time she sees Captain Fisher. He just drops her off, you know. And a lot of stories like to go on and be like, oh, well, no love lost there. But what was supposed to happen? Like, I don't think in that time, like, it was like he could just have her on his ships all the time. So, you know, I think it was very clear for both of them that they were going to go their separate ways as soon as they arrived at St. Louis, you know? But I don't know. I wasn't there, so I'm just inputting my own opinion. Take it or leave it. All right, so she's in St. Louis. She gets enrolled in the convent, and so Kate finds herself in the care of the Sisters of the Ursuline. My God, this is the hardest word I've ever said. In the cares of the Sisters of the Ursuline convent. For 15-year-old Kate, though, well, it wasn't the life for her. Let's be honest here. Of course it wasn't. Kate, who literally just lost her, like, everything at 15. She lost everything at 15. Okay? Not just her parents, but her family, her world. She lost everything. So then she goes and gets herself to Mississippi, gets on a steamship, enters like a love affair with a captain, and now she's expected to just follow the rules and just be a good, quiet girl. On top of that, Kate may have been 15, but she was a strong-willed. She wasn't one to really just quiet down. That continues through her entire life. It just wasn't who she was. So yeah, it makes sense that the convent life wasn't for Kate. And it was only a few days into staying in the convent that Kate pretty much said, you know, fuck this. And she ran away. So Kate dips from the convent, right? And goes and finds herself a husband. Shortly after leaving the convent, she meets and falls in love with Silas Melvin, who was a dentist in St. Louis. The two get married and lived in Missouri happily for a while. They eventually have a son together, but tragedy is going to hit Kate's life once again, as not even a year into her son's life, her baby and husband get sick with cholera. This kind of checks out. The time's a little bit weird, but Missouri had two cholera outbreaks, one in 1849 and then the other in 1866, which killed thousands and thousands of people. I wasn't sure what cholera was, so I had to look it up, and now you get to know what it is as well. Cholera is an acute diarrheal illness caused by an infection of the intestines with the Vibrio cholerae bacteria. Really struggled with that one. People can get sick with this. People can get sick when they swallow like food and water that's contaminated with cholerae bacteria. The infection nowadays is often mild or without symptoms, but can sometimes be very severe and life-threatening. And in the 1800s, when things were dirty, this was life-threatening. And so basically you were like, just, it's horrible, but you were like, had a really bad like diarrhea problem that you were probably constantly drinking contaminated water, so you were never really getting hydrated, and unfortunately it was taking a lot of people's lives during that time, which is sad. Sadly, both Kate's husband and son died shortly after getting sick. In most accounts, the mention of her first husband and child go on to say that it is something that isn't proven though, because no records exist of them. They use this against Kate, almost as if she's a big fat liar because of this. A lot of Kate's story is often chucked up as a fib or a tell because they have no historical proof. But I would like to point out that this was the 1860s. The 1860s. I'll say it one more time for you. The 1860s. So much had to go right to have existing records of everyone who lived and died, especially in a time when everyone was dying. We're talking about a time when the average lifespan was 39 years old. Imagine all the people we don't know about and just get to fade away in history because no historical records exist of them, making their life maybe not true. Just weird to me. Hi, baby. Side notes, it's just so weird to me the way a lot of articles just brush her account of her own life off. They just brush her off because we don't have records. The language used makes it very clear that they basically just don't believe her. They do this to discredit her later on in her story when they don't like her side of things or her thoughts and opinions and her truth. Now, I'm not saying that she could have possibly fibbed about some things and lied. It's possible she lied about her husband and kid, but it's doubtful. No offense. I just think that for a woman and their life, it's just not as well documented, and so people, you know how it is. Anyways, it's just like weird to me because if you look at later on in the story, we're going to be introduced to some men who are very prominent men in our history. Okay, if you know who Big Nose Kate is, if you know why she is a lot of the times considered a side character, we're going to get there. But if you know already, then you understand that a lot of these guys' stories are also not historically recorded. The reason it is recorded is because it results into a big thing, okay? But even then, the story isn't as it is told today. But we are much kinder in the way we write their history than when we write her history. So that's what I mean. But it's just weird to me, the difference between the way we talk about Kate and the way we talk about the others in her story. We'll get there though. Kate is now devastated. Of course, she just lost her baby and husband and now alone again in this crazy freaking world, homeless and without any money or protection. At this time, she's around 17, maybe 18. This is when she meets Blank I'm gonna, and listen, I'm really sorry that I'm gonna just not say this lady's name right. I'm horrible at pronouncing words in general, but I'm trying, okay? And no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anywhere on how to pronounce her name. One, because there's no records of this lady living. Want to know why? Well, because she was, of course, in the sex world, and so they couldn't let her live on and let her move on in life and history and just... Anyways, I'm rambling. Anyways, I'm not going to pronounce her name right, and I'm very sorry about that. I'm going to try my best, but here we go. This is when Kate meets Blank Tribolts. Madame Tribolts introduces Kate to the world of sex work, and this is where Kate's life changes for the better, baby. Madame Tribolts becomes more than just an employer to Kate. Blanc was a friend and a mother figure and a mother type to Kate. Madame Tribolts doted over Kate, considering Kate her prodigy. With a little bit of guidance from her, Kate becomes the house's busiest lady. I mean, of course she was. Kate's very voluptuous and beautiful with a very, very big personality. It is said that her Hungarian accent, unique for this time, enticed a fair number of men to seek out her company. So the lifestyle of a whore worked for Kate. She was now able to take care of herself. She didn't have to rely on a man. She now could make her own money. And for someone who has been alone a lot in her life, this is a good thing for her, because now she doesn't have to... It is weird to think about this time period because we just don't understand what the fuck we were doing and like why we were living the way we were living. And also, we just can't, as someone who is grown up with technology, we all have, like, we have access to way more than they did. We just cannot wrap our head around what it was like to be living in that time period, but also we really can't wrap our head around what it was like to be a woman. There was no real options for us. If we weren't married, we were nothing. We weren't anything if we were married. We were just their property, you know? So to find freedom for a woman who really had a big part, like, she was like feisty. She was someone who did not take shit from nobody. Clearly, she at 15, I mean, that man is so lucky she didn't axe his head off. To be honest, I'm taking that man's head. I'm taking his dick. Sorry, Mom. You know, like, he's so lucky. But she was feisty, so she took, you know, she was not taking shit from this world or from the men within this world. So good for her. But getting introduced to something a woman could do and make a lot of money and be financially free and in this time period, no matter what people thought of her, she didn't care. So she really did find sex work as a savior to her life in a way. Yeah, the lifestyle of a whore worked for Kate. She was now able to take care of herself, but not only that, now she had her own way of making money and she could fucking spoil herself. Now that she was able to, she definitely made sure she dressed in the finest of fashions. You know, good for her. Carrying her and presenting herself in a class that a lot of women of this time wouldn't even dream to think about. However, tragedy was going to strike again in Kate's life. And damn, tragedy strikes a lot in Kate's life. That sucks. It really does. But yes, tragedy is going to strike again in Kate's life. And I should say this next part of her story is, oh no, according to Kate. So, because there is no tangible record of this, I should preference this by saying this part of Kate's story is alleged because they have no actual proof. So, take it or leave it. But I'm in the business of believing women and don't believe that this story is made up. So, according to Kate, sometime in 1869, 19-year-old Kate was already a girl well-versed in the world of vice and seemed to be the type of woman not to be scared or back down from anything. So when she walked in on Joan's stonebreak, right after he killed her beloved madam, she did the only reasonable thing she could think of. She shot him. While he crumpled to the floor, still alive, but definitely in bad shape, Kate pulls out the crystal stopper out of the glass container she knew was filled with brandy and poured herself a drink. After shooting back the first, she pours herself another one and slams that one back as well, pointing her derringer, which is a gun, at the withering man on the floor, who is now lying in a pool of his own blood, with a bullet somewhere in his upper chest. Kate looks over at the lifeless body of Blanc and says, "You had no cause to kill Blanc. You're a miserable cur," which translation means you're a miserable dog. And Kate poured herself another drink. Joan attempts to sit up. Spitting blood, he sneers. She was asking. Kate, looking back at her beloved madam, whose lifeless body was slumped over the chair, blinking away tears, she turns back to Jones. "No, she wasn't," Kate responds, pointing the gun at his head, stating, "But you sure as hell have," before squeezing the trigger and lodging a bullet in between his eyes, cheersing his collapsing body with another drink before pocketing her gun and leaving the parlor house, her home, once again. After this, alone again with a little bit of money but not wanting to be in St. Louis anymore, Kate takes off. She finds herself traveling and wandering about Missouri and Kansas, finally finding herself stumbling into Wichita, Kansas in 1874, when she finds work for Bessie, the sister-in-law of lawman Wyatt Earp, who was running a parlor house. The sister-in-law was running the parlor house. It was here that she meets Wyatt Earp and the Earp family. Who the fuck is Wyatt Earp? Well, Wyatt is an American lawman and gambler in the wild, wild west, of course. He makes history, along with a few others we'll meet in a bit. We'll get to that. But here are a few things you need to know about Wyatt Earp. His wife also had a brothel in Wichita. 2 of his 3 wives were known to be working girls. So when Kate goes on to write letters to her niece about how she had an affair with the lawman and he often made visits to her while working within Bessie's house. But again, this is according to Kate, because in the eyes of history, there's no historical proof to prove that she had an affair with Wyatt, including the letters to her nieces. Those don't count as historical evidence. Eventually, though, Wyatt stops seeing Kate and reunites with his, at the time, common-law wife, Maddie Belloc, which I don't want to go too into depth about Maddie because, well, she's a queen herself and deserves her story told, not just glossed over. So we will eventually get to Maddie. Kate moves a lot, okay? I think that was just common for the life of someone in Vice or in that Wild West. You were moving where the money was. And so around the time that her and Wyatt stop seeing each other, Kate decides it's time for a change. So In 1875, she makes the move to Dodge City, Kansas. While she's in Dodge City, though, she quickly hears about all the money to be made in the South, having her traveling to Fort Griffin, Texas. And this was a popular settlement, but was filled with all kinds of men riding the line. Cowboys, buffalo hunters, outlaws, and gamblers. You know, all sorts of the wild type. Arriving in town, Kate finds a job at Shancy's Saloon as a dance hall girl. This is where she sets her sight on a handsome gambler. Doc Holliday wasn't like the other drunk and gamblers that you normally found within saloons. Kate noticed that right away. She was attracted to the air of sophistication he had, not to mention the seething anguish in those pale blue eyes that she just wanted to soothe oh so bad. Doc, by the time Kate meets him, had already very well made a name for himself as a hot-tempered gambler, quick to pull the trigger. However, he wasn't born in the wild, wild ways of the West. In fact, Doc-born John Henry Holliday was able to graduate dentistry school and opened his own practice until shortly after he was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1873. Getting diagnosed with tuberculosis in this time was a death sentence, and it wasn't a quick and painless one either. So with that death sentence hanging over his head, Doc decided he was going to go live that bad boy life and die on an adventure in the Old West, where he had a plan to drink himself to death instead of cough himself to death. He seemed to have a knack for the life, though, in the Wild Wild West, because he gets real good with a gun and betting. The drunker and sicker he becomes, the more hot-tempered and angry he becomes with anyone he feels may have crossed him. Doc finds himself in Fort Griffin, Texas, dealing cards in, you guessed it, John Shancy's saloon. So Kate meets Doc in this boomtown that is popping off because of the army post that was placed right outside of the town. I think by now we are learning where there is military, there is a need for working girls, which is the reason why Kate had made herself Fort Griffin in the first place. While she got a job within the saloon as a dance hall girl and working as a prostitute still, it was only a matter of time before Kate crossed paths with Doc. Upon meeting him, she was smitten. Kate really liked his reckless sophistication and just his bad boy ways. Doc, though, was a sick man and didn't really like to get involved with any of the ladies for a quick roll in the hay, let alone a long-term relationship. This was all going to change, though, with Kate. Kate at the time had already acquired the nickname Big Nose Kate. Some say simply because she had a prominent nose. Others say it was Wyatt himself who gave Kate her nickname because she was always sticking her nose in other people's business. Both could be true. Both could be false. It's hard to say either way. So if you ask my opinion, I say it was both. Kate knew what she wanted, and it was the handsome gambler dentist with the fast gun. Well, Doc, he didn't have a fighting chance against Kate. 0% chance. He was already attracted to her, that was clear. Kate was unique with her dark features, very voluptuous beauty that wasn't often seen in the Wild Wild West. Kate wasn't going to be okay with the occasional rendezvous with Doc, though, so she did what she did best. And that was being Big Nose Kate. She stuck her nose in his business. When he wasn't dealing cards at the saloon, she would go out of her way looking for him, finding him at the local watering holes and other gambling dens, just basically putting herself in his presence whenever she had the chance, letting him know, hey, I'm right here, and I'm here for you. She made it known she wanted him, and that just because he was sick doesn't mean he was dead. She knew he was into her, and oh boy, was he. He was already very attracted to her, of course, but it was more than that. He was into her. She was fiercely independent and had a glorious vocabulary for curse words. But most importantly, she didn't run from his anger, and she had a temper herself, so she fought fire with fire, and he loved that. So it wasn't long before she had him seeing that she was good medicine for him. Listen, as a nosy girl myself, I can't be out here judging Kate for her nosy ways. In fact, I'm like, hell yeah, girl, you go. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and she was going to make it happen either way. A lot of articles make her seem bad for this, make it seem as if she just pressured him into liking her, like bullying him into liking her, like there was no way he was ever going to be into her unless she forced it upon him. But let's be honest here, shall we? This was a sick man who I'm sure most people turned away from, and let me tell you, the pictures that we have of Doc Holliday, he's a handsome man, okay? All of them seem to be pretty decently good looking, you know? But he was very sick, and he was very angry, and he was very mean. So I don't think he had a lot of women chasing his way anyways, but for her, she was like, I'm into this, this is what I want, and he probably was like, no, at first, because he was sick and probably dead. You don't know how long you have to live, so you don't want to get entangled with that. But she was like, baby, I want you, and I know you want me, so I'm going to make this happen. So how long do you think she really had to pressure him in to falling for her? I doubt very long at all, and I don't think it was a lot of pressure. I don't think it was pressure. I don't think it was pressured at all. I think he was into her. I think he was into her. And it wasn't long before Doc was in love with Kate. History proves that it was quite an intense relationship, both being stubborn, passionate, and we can't forget the mass amount of booze they were both drinking. This all put together made them a good couple for the wild, wild west. Kate worked throughout their entire relationship because she liked having her independence. No man was going to take that away from her. And if I'm going to be honest, I think that Doc kind of liked that she had her. When you were a man back in that day, when you took on, like, marrying a woman or being involved with a woman, you were also going to have to take on providing for her. And so if he knew he was dying, he didn't want to get involved with anyone who couldn't provide for themselves afterwards. Maybe I'm just making Doc a little bit better than he was. I don't know. I didn't live that time, but from what I can tell, I think that's what it was. I think I definitely think he loved how independent she was and just how much she gave it back to him and was like, I don't give a, no, you motherfucker. Like, we all have that friend couple that are just really feisty with each other, and you're like, do they hate each other? But really, they're just like really in love, and they let each other be feisty and don't take bullshit from either one. So I'm assuming that even though this was back in the 1800s, people don't change that much, and that's kind of what the relationship they had going on. And it was, of course, a little bit more intense because there was no rules in the Wild Wild West. So, anyways. Kate did work throughout her entire relationship as a prostitute and a dance hall girl. And so she continued to make her own money while he continued to do his own thing, gambling and drinking said money away. Kate took care of her man no matter what. He may piss her off, but he was hers, and she was the only one allowed to give him hell. One evening, Doc is downstairs playing poker like he does when he catches another player cheating. You remember what I said about Doc's temper? Well, he hated a cheat. So after catching him cheating, he proceeds to plunge his knife into the gentleman's stomach. You know, the logical thing to do. No one cheats around Doc. Doc definitely goes on to get arrested for this. Not only getting arrested for stabbing, but also because he was possibly drinking during the poker game, which was strictly prohibited. You were not allowed to drink and gamble at the same time. You weren't allowed to drink at the gambling table, but you could get up and go have a shot, come back, gamble some more. You know, you just weren't allowed to drink at the table. He didn't care. It was unclear if the cheat survived or not, but most likely he did not. When Kate, who most likely was either working the floor of the saloon or working upstairs, got word her man had been arrested, she went into action. Knowing she wasn't about to let Doc sit in jail, she started her heist mission right away, beginning with setting the town on fire. While the town people are rushing to contain it, Kate steals 2 horses and rides over to the hotel where they were keeping Doc in a makeshift jail. Yeah, this town was so small that they didn't really have a jail. Pulling her 2 pistols out on the one guard still stationed at Doc's door, you know, she probably said something along the lines like, "Let him go." I'm assuming, I don't know. She said something, you know. Getting the point though, the guard was not willing to gamble with his life, so he lets Doc free, where he's able to hop onto the second horse and they ride like hell out of town. Had she not rescued him, Doc most likely would have faced the hangman's noose. So, had she not rescued her man, he was looking at a death sentence. I don't want to be too bold in this statement here, but I bet you they had wild sex that night. Like, I don't have any historical proof of this or anything, but I feel pretty confident in saying they got it on hot and heavy as soon as the coast was clear and they had the chance. I'm sorry, Mom. After fleeing Fort Griffin, Kate and Doc decide to head back to Dodge City. It's on this journey that they promise each other no more vice. They were going to give up that life. Arriving at Dodge City with the goal to give up vice and settle down together, Doc goes to work setting up a new dental practice. They move into Deacon's Cox boarding house, registered as Mr. and Mrs. J.H. Holliday. Although they claim to be married, we have, again, no historical proof of this. So most say they were probably just practicing in a common law marriage at this point. Kate continues to work as a prostitute. At times, Doc could be an ass to her about her chosen profession. Kate didn't give a fuck enough, though, to quit. She liked her career, it provided her with her own income, and she didn't have to answer to anybody, including her sometimes ass of a husband. Doc and Kate fought just as much as they loved, but Kate really did become his medicine. He needed her. She seemed to be the only one who knew how to ease him through coughing attacks. No matter how volatile the relationship they shared could be, Doc didn't care. He loved her and the hot-tempered love they had. And it was love. In my opinion, again, I wasn't there or anything, but like, come on. It was love. It was in Dodge City that Kate would go on to introduce Doc to Wyatt Earp. Doc and Wyatt become fast friends, of course. They have one thing in common. They like to gamble. Duh. They're going to become friends. Wyatt would often be a witness to their lover quarrels. Often, Wyatt would suggest to Doc that he should belt her one. Doc would reply, "Men cannot do what he wants in this world, but only that which will benefit him." Good for you, Doc, for knowing what was good for you, and belting his woman wasn't it. Doc and Wyatt started playing nightly card games, slowly going back to that life of vice, eventually spending less time at his dentistry practice and more time with late night drinks. This would in return turn into long bouts of sickness and just struggle. Kate, though, never left his side, and when he wasn't able to provide for himself, Kate provided for him. As a working girl, she never left his side and would always be there to help him get well, and you better believe it, he loved her for it. Eventually, Kate and Doc leave Dodge City, moving to Colorado for a bit. They left Colorado and went to Las Vegas. It was in Las Vegas that Doc would open another dentist where he would work during the day. He also opened a saloon that he would run at night, all while Kate continued plying her trade. Eventually, the couple moved to New Mexico, and Kate would get a job as a dance hall girl until she was able to save enough money to open her and run her own parlor house in Santa Fe. So things are going really well with Kate and Doc at this time. They are making money, enjoying each other, and just all around enjoying what life is offering them. His health at the time was pretty much stable. I mean, he was still smoking and drinking and gambling, so not that stable, but like she made sure he had a good balance. She knew she wasn't going to be able to take him away from just like all of the action, but she made sure he balanced it to keep himself as healthy as possible. Yeah, so she basically made sure he wasn't getting swallowed by the life of vice. That was until Wyatt rolls into town. Kate would later go on to say that she regretted introducing Doc to Wyatt. The herbs had such a power, I could not get Doc away from them. In 1879, Wyatt comes into town looking for Doc. He was on his way to Arizona. His brother, Virgil Earp, was the town constable in Prescott, Arizona. He let Wyatt know about the huge silver mining opportunity that was happening in the boom town of Tombstone, Arizona. Greatest name for a town. I've been there when I was real young. I need to go back. Didn't realize how cool it was. I mean, of course I realized how cool it was when I was a kid, but now I know extra how cool it is. Anyways, but so he lets him know about the silver mining opportunity, but along with that, he also lets him know about some drama that was happening with his brother and a few cowboys, and these cowboys needed taken care of. Kate was understandably fucking pissed at Wyatt, who just came riding in here convincing her man to leave town and put himself right back into the life of vice that she was trying hard to get him kind of away from. Tombstone was known to be quite the lawless and very volatile, very violent, very aggressive. And Kate tried like hell to talk him out of it, but it was no use because, like Kate, he was a stubborn man and he had his mind made up. He wanted her to come with, but Kate did not want to go to Tombstone. So Doc joins the Earps in Tombstone in 1880 without Kate. Kate, though, wasn't going to be letting her man go too far without her. Understandably pissed, but still in love with Doc, she moves close to Globe, Arizona, which is about a 3-hour drive to Tombstone. I honestly tried like hell to figure out how long this trip would be by traveling via stagecoach. But sadly, I am not sure. There's no real... I'm assuming it was longer than... I don't know. Maybe it was about the same amount because you don't have to deal with traffic or anything. But you are on a horse. I don't know. But anyways, I'm not sure how long it took. But she was in Globe. He was in Tombstone. They were semi not together. because she didn't want to go to Tombstone, and she was pissed off that he was getting himself like wrapped up in someone else's drama. Kate goes on to buy herself a hotel with the money she made while running the parlor house. She runs this as a hotel / brothel, still plying her trade. At this time, she might not have been actually selling sex herself, but she was definitely still selling sex. She made sure she was keeping herself close to Doc, but not also being involved in all of that craziness. It was in 1881. Kate missed her man, so she headed off to Tombstone for a little visit, where she was dismayed to see that in their time apart, he had grown very much sicker. Clearly, Doc had missed her as well. If I dare insert myself here, I don't think he wanted to be separated from her at all. She just also didn't want to see him get himself killed over someone else's drama. Though still wasn't willing to he still wasn't willing to give up the herbs either. And he wanted the boys, he wanted Kate and the boys. Which is kind of why I think, like, he knew she was moving to Globe and they saw each other. They were, like, never really separated, but kind of separated. But, like, as soon as she's back in town, he's, like, so glad my woman's here. Like, goddamn, I've missed you. So he's still not willing to give up the herbs, and Kate often let him know how much that pissed her off. Like, she couldn't get him away from these dudes. I think that has a lot to do with Wyatt, because, like, he was, like, I think one of those men who were almost like a sweet talker, could talk anyone into anything. So that also included Doc. So she would often let him know, like, she was pissed off that he wouldn't leave them, and she felt they were just trouble and only causing Doc's health to decline faster. It was the night of March 15th, 1881, when a couple of armed robbers attempt to hold up a stagecoach near the town of Constantine, Arizona. In the holdup, the robbers killed the driver and passenger of the stagecoach. At this point, this was like a bank stagecoach, like a Wells Fargo bank stagecoach. And yeah, Wells Fargo has been around for a very long time. So it was a very big deal that this stagecoach got held up and that there was 2 murders along with it. At this time, the Cochise County Sheriff, Johnny Bogan, and the deputy of the town, Frank Stillwell, they are kind of part of this cowboy group that had been beefing with the Earps and Holiday at this point. And these 2 cops see their opportunity to frame one of them. And they know Kate's in town, and so they use this to their advantage. They take her in for questioning. It just so happened that Kate and Doc had gotten into a fight, and she was extremely pissed off at him. I really think she was trying to get him out of Tombstone. If I'm not gonna lie to you, I think she wanted him to get away from the boys, and that's why they were constantly fighting at this time in their life, is because she was like, what the hell are you doing? These guys are bad for you. The sheriff and deputy decide to use that fight to their advantage. But, when they take her into questioning, they're not getting what they want from her. So they would go on to decide to give her shots of alcohol, lots of them, getting her drunk and wild up. You know how cops are when they're questioning you and getting, feeding you drinks. It's only worse when there's drinks involved, like nowadays, at least we got laws. They didn't have no laws back then, so they were just allowed to do what they wanted. And part of that was getting her very, 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 very drunk and then using her like pain and anger against her. So after getting her extremely intoxicated, they go on to start to question her. Drunk angry and hurt in this situation that she wasn't fully aware of what was actually going on and what she was doing, because, you know, the cops fucking got her hammered. Kate was then coerced into signing an affidavit that she had witnessed Doc being responsible for the robbery and murder. That was all they needed to go take Doc in and arrest him. Sobering up, Kate was devastated with what she had done, of course. Like, what the fuck? They just drugged her and then made her sign a piece of paper that she didn't even write, you know? Like, that's crazy. Knowing that she couldn't let it stand, though, she was pretty much drugged, if I'm gonna be honest, into signing something that she didn't even write. So she went to the judge and recanted her statement, and they really had no other option but to drop the charges and let Doc out. Doc being reasonably upset with Kate. We can't be mad at him for being upset with her, or at least being upset with the situation. The whole situation just was shitty. So he basically tells her she needs to go home, and he gives her some money to get a stagecoach ticket and go home. So she pretty much goes with little fight, you know, like she's pretty mad at him because he's not leaving the boys. He's mad at her because he just almost got arrested for murder because of her. So, like, you know, understandably, they're upset. This being their second more serious breakup that they had. So yeah, Kate returns to Globe broken hearted, of course, but she goes back to running her hotel brothel for a while, doing her thing. But it isn't long, though, that she gets that call-in to go back to the man she loves and knows deep down inside he loves her too. The last time she had left, she'd seen him. He was very, very sick, mean eyes, a head full of gray hair, and just all around gaunt. And she was definitely worried for him. So off she went to Tombstone to be with her hard-headed lover. She returns to Tombstone just in time to be a witness to the OK Corral 30-second shootout on October 26th, 1881. This was a shootout between Doc Holliday and his boys and the rowdy group of cowboys who had been causing trouble within the town. A couple of those cowboys, Billy Clanton and both the McCloyer brothers, were killed in this shootout. Virgil, Morgan, and Doc were all injured in the shootout but survived. Kate witnessed the shootout from their room at Fly's boarding house and was waiting for him when he returned. According to Kate, she held Doc that night while he wept to her about how awful it was. Things weren't going to end with that shootout, though, as some of the cowboys in the gang had run, and they knew that. Doc and the boys knew that. And they weren't going to just give up after a few of theirs had been killed. So things were only going to get worse for the Doc and the Earp boys. Tombstone already getting more intense and dangerous, Kate doesn't stay long in Tombstone, often going back to Globe and her brothel. She had a business to run, you know? Whether that was because it may have been seriously dangerous for her to be there, or just because she didn't want to watch the man she loved try and go out and get himself killed faster than the disease could. However, whatever the reason, they continued to see each other despite being separated. While being separated, Doc is still fully involved with Wyatt and the Earp brothers' mission to take down the remaining cowboys. At this point, a full-out war is going on between the two. Virgil Earp was ambushed by the cowboys at one point and was permanently injured in December of 1881. Then Morgan Earp was ambushed and killed in March of 1882, presumably by Frank Stillwell, the deputy that issued the arrest warrant for Doc earlier. So now for the boys, it was even more personal. They travel all around the West to track down and locate the remaining cowboys. After the death of Morgan, the townspeople find Frank Stelwell's body along the railroads, and he had been shot up. Charles Myers issues an arrest warrant for the remaining Earps and Doc Holliday. Not letting that stop them, though, they continue on with their journey for revenge. But on May 15th, 1882, Holliday is arrested in Denver on the arrest warrant that was issued for the murder of Frank. At this point, his health was declining even worse. Like, he's in bad shape. He was not in a good state, and Wyatt found out about the arrest and knew he wouldn't get a fair trial. And so he pulled some strings with the chief of police of the Trinidad, Colorado, to help get Doc out of prison. Doc was dying, out of money, and now in full-blown alcoholic. He is an alcoholic and just not doing well. He's not hitting big on gambling anymore, and his sickness is really taking over, both his alcoholism and the tuberculosis. I really struggle saying that word. Kate gets word that Doc ain't doing well, and that he's in Colorado and his health is declining. Yeah, so she decides she's going to travel to him. And this is where she gives up her hotel and gives up her life in Globe that is going quite successfully for her to go take care of her man. Historical records do show that Kate took him to her brother's Alexander's ranch near Glenwood Springs. He was already kind of in that town. He had the mindset that I think there's like a water youth pond thing there that's popular, and he had the mindset that this would help him get better. However, the sulfur that emits in the air and the high altitude of Colorado probably did not help. But anyways, she takes him to her brother's ranch that he happens to be in the area. And this is where she will provide for him as a working girl and nursing him and loving him through his final days. He was no longer able to provide for himself, and she provided for him and took care of this man as through his final years. Doc sadly dies in the Glenwood Spring Hotel on November 8th, 1887, with Kate by his side the entire time. Sadly, he was only 36 years old when he passed away. But I guess for the Wild Wild West times, that was late in age, as most people averagely only survive till 39, sadly. Okay, so Kate knew this was going to happen. Doc knew this was going to happen, but when it happens, it still hurts. More, of course, for the person who's left behind and alone, but that is the price Kate paid to love a man like Doc. She had gotten her time to be mad, sad, and also say her goodbyes. And on some days, I'm sure she hated him, missed him other days. But this was her man, someone that was in her life for over 10 years. It's not easy just overcoming a loss like this one in one's life. However, a loss like this is unique because she had 10 years to love him, but also had 10 years living with the emotions, knowing that she was going to lose him at any point. So she had throughout their entire relationship, I'm sure she had many times where she thought she was going to have to say goodbye to him sooner than she did. And I'm sure, it's different when you're in a relationship with someone who has a long-term illness, that saying goodbye happens differently than someone who just suddenly passes, is what I'm trying to say. So, I'm sure she had a ton of emotions when he did pass, but she had plenty of time to say her goodbye with him while he was still living, if that makes sense. Kate definitely doesn't get enough credit for the strength of a woman to take on the love of a dying man. So I definitely have so much respect for Kate. I think it's easy to look down on the love they shared because it's often referred to as volatile and violent, which it was. In this time, things were different, so I'm not advocating for people putting their hands on each other, but it just was a different time. Big Nose Kate, well, she definitely gave as good as she got, but it seems that they both loved each other. In my opinion, listen, I love love, so I am maybe biased in my opinion of Kate and Doc, but I kind of love their story and don't want to look down on it either. I am not advocating for their toxic relationship or abuse. However, I just have a hard time believing that it was extremely physical abusive, because it wasn't like Doc was out here belting his woman like some of the other ones that we know of. Life was way different in the 1800s. Making love different and living in the wild west was different as well. Kate was feisty, and she was feisty as hell and didn't take shit from anyone, and she lived almost like a man would, in that time. It was a slightly toxic relationship at times, but it's kind of hard to think that it was a horrible relationship, because why would they spend 10 years together, They spent more time together than they did separated in the time when he was in Tombstone. Yeah, so it was very clear to me that they loved each other, that Kate loved him not just because of his bad boy ways, but because who he was. And it's clear that he also loved Kate for who she was, and didn't look too down upon her about her career choice. Allegedly, they could both be hot-tempered, and she definitely wiggled her way into his heart. We cannot deny the fact that Doc loved her. Historically, Kate is Doc's only love interest through his entire life. It could be said that it was because he didn't want to get entangled with anyone while he was sick, but it also seems he didn't have any interests before getting diagnosed with tuberculosis. And it seems that he may have really had a type, and Kate was it. She was a badass. She did not act like other women of this time period. She acted very fierce and independent and just zero shits. And so she was very unique for the time period she was living in, okay? And I think he was like, I'm into this. Clearly, he was into it. Doc's story may have ended, but Kate's has not. And that's who we're here for. Kate no longer wanted to be a part of the volatile West, as things were changing rapidly. But also, it's probably because she was getting a little bit older, and living that life probably made her miss her man, to be honest. I mean, he was such a big part of the West for her that I'm sure it just wasn't the same. And things were also changing very rapidly, making the West a more dangerous place. Kate didn't mind changing with the times, and so this is where she will go on to reinvent herself again. In 1888, a year after Doc passes, she is going to go on to marry a blacksmith named George Cumming. For a brief time, she runs a bakery. Yeah, so for a brief time, she's married to George, running a bakery, but this is a very brief marriage. George was an alcoholic, and though he thought he wanted a fiery woman, it became very clear very shortly after they exchanged vows he didn't really love her wild ways, and she left him almost as quickly as she married him. He proved to be pretty abusive, and the actual abusive type, the kind that would belt his woman when he didn't like what she had to say or she talked back. Side note, if it seems as if I'm throwing shade at Wyatt Earp this entire time, don't worry. I am. If I could eye roll every time I mentioned him, I would, to be honest. Upon doing the research about Kate, Doc, and her story, Doc and her stories are intertwined, making her story intertwined with the Wyatt and Earp brothers. His story is a beloved one throughout history. However, historically, he was an ass, but he has two queens in his life that deserve their stories told, so we will get to him and his lying ass ways eventually. But just know that his story isn't as cool as everyone makes him seem. In fact, it seems like he got the notoriety of being a badass lawman gambler who took down some wild cowboys, but he may not have been really a part of it as much as like Doc and his brothers were. So, just keep that in mind. And also, he was the type to belt a woman when they talked back. So you can imagine I don't have high thoughts of this one. Anyways, we will get to his girls' stories eventually, and his lying-ass story will come to light here I'm paying for it. Everyone has to pay for it one way or another. Anyways, Kate leaves George, and I think this is a huge tell about how non-abusive and toxic her relationship with Doc really was. Because I don't think Kate would have ever stayed with a man that actually laid hands on her. She did, however, choose to keep George's last name, taking her final identity as Catherine Honorary Cummings. I think that her choice to keep his last name was not all in any way a show of love or affection for that man, but just to benefit her and her attempt to distance herself from the past. After the end of that marriage, Kate went to Cochise, Arizona, where she is going to get a job working in the Cochise Hotel for a bit as a housekeeper, until she was able to meet a miner named John J. Harold, who kept her employed for over 30 years. So she spends a lot of time being John J. Harold's housemaid. I'm very confused by this because, was he paying her to be a housewife but just not getting married? Was she cleaning his house but also, I'm not going to judge. I don't know. This part's very unclear. They just say he kept her employed for 30 years. After his death, he's going to go on to leave her everything, which, to be honest, wasn't much. But Kate, though, decides to reach out to his only daughter that was living in Temple, Arizona, and she settles the inheritance to the daughter. Kate's a badass even later in life because at this point she's again alone and has no real place to live, and so she comes up with a plan. She reaches out to longtime friend, the Arizona governor George Hunt. I wonder how that friendship blossomed. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. This is when she applies for the Arizona Pioneer Home. The Arizona Pioneer Home, also known as the Home for the Arizona Pioneers and State Hospital for Disabled Miners. This was quite a request coming from Kate, as the retirement home and hospital, historically, they didn't admit women, and they also required those who were admitted to be born within the U.S., which, well, we know Kate was neither a man or a U.S. citizen. Kate, though, she had set her mind to getting admitted to that house. She does what she must to make it happen, and she lied. On her application, she lied and stated that she was an American born in Davenport, Iowa. She also listed Doc Holliday as a husband on her application, and it took 6 months, but Kate becomes the first woman to be admitted to the Arizona Pioneer Home in 1935. Basically, again, being a woman in a male space. She spends her remaining years after that advocating for the miners' rights and living comforts, becoming very outspoken in her fight for the rights and comforts of the other residents. Kate wrote many letters to the Arizona state legislator. When that didn't get the response she was looking for, she would contact the governor to make sure she got what she wanted. Towards the end of her life, Kate had a lot of reporters at her door wanting her story. They wanted to know about her time with Doc Holliday and all the Wild Wild West adventures they shared. She refused to talk to any of them, other than Anton Mazovic and the Prescott historian A.W. Bork. She did, however, record her own story, collecting materials she wanted to use in her biography. Kate wanted a small fortune to tell her story, though, and at the time, no publisher would give it to her, especially since her story painted the beloved Earps and Doc in not an always positive light. So, of course, they had to chalk her story up to being an aging horror's way of trying to gain favor before passing. How shitty. Kate will go on to pass away 5 years after moving into the Pioneer House, 5 days before her 90th birthday on November 2nd, 1940, never getting the chance to write her story. In 2019, New York's bestseller Chris Entz is able to bring Kate's story back to life. In the book, according to Kate, Kate was a motherfucking badass and a brave woman to take on a dying man and choose to love him through it. This isn't an easy thing to do. Her story deserves to be told right along with the likes like Wyatt and Doc, not just as a side character to them. She gambled, she shot her guns, drank, and fended for herself. She embodied and lived the life of a true Wild Wild West queen. The good, the bad, the wild, and dangerous. Living her life for herself and no one else. She probably could have let Doc take care of her in the years they spent in New Mexico and Las Vegas while he was working as a dentist, but she liked her freedom and independence she gained with her career as a working girl, never caring what others thought of her or her career. Concluding her story saying, "Part is funny, part is sad, but such is a life any way you take it." I knew Kate's story very briefly as a child. I had seen Tombstone, which is based on the story of the OK Carroll shootout, but it wasn't until I started digging into her story that I realized her story is so wild, honestly. Kate was a woman in a man's space her entire life, and she made herself fit and belong there. She was able to come out alive healthy, and that is no thanks to the men that she ran with. She took care of herself, made her own money, and lived for herself. I mean, living in the 1800s must have just been so intense, to be honest, but her life is a wild ride from start to finish, and she's just another prime example of a woman who chose her career path and loved the freedom that came along with it. Also, I would like to take a moment to reflect on how savage it was to be alive in the 1800s. Like, god damn. Just researching Kate's story, I kept getting reminded of the time period, but also I kept reminding myself, like, this is reading like a movie, but it was sure not a movie. It is someone's life. Like, she really did lose her parents at 15. She was in Mexico. Like, all of the, even just like the beginning parts of her life are crazy, not just the ones with Doc. And after, she was just knew what she wanted and never stopped getting it, basically. So yeah, just living in that, I just kept getting reminded of like the time period and just like how crazy it must have been to be like alive and living your best life in this time, you know? Like, you just had to deal with what you had, basically. Researching and retelling these badass women from history stories has been such an amazing time for me so far. Like, I know I'm only on episode 7, but just these few stories I've had been able to discover and share have been so awesome, but also getting to visit history through the eyes of a woman, no matter what their chosen profession is so very special and exciting. I have just so fallen in love with doing this and more. Let me take my glasses off to get real with y'all. Just like, I don't know, just more and more researching these ladies' stories and hearing their life through their eyes is just great. And just relearning history through them. Not just what they want us to know and believe about the men, but learning the history of women who rode along right alongside those men. And honestly, if we're being honest, Doc Holliday's story wouldn't be as cool if he hadn't met Kate. Kate is the reason he is known. Like, had he stabbed that man in Fort Griffin, Texas without Kate by his side, we would not be talking about him. We would not know him. He would be just another faceless, nameless man in the past that would go untold, you know? So, yeah, we have to appreciate Kate because she's the one who introduced them to the Wyatts. She's the one they became friends. Like, she's the reason that they have that connection. So it's like, I don't know, we just like to write out the women of history, especially the ones that weren't well behaved. But, you know, like we always say, well-behaved women rarely ever make history, and Kate did not make history for being well-behaved, and we love her for that. But yeah, I've just been really enjoying these stories, and every time I research one, I find another woman's name that deserves her story to be told. So I hope you guys are enjoying it just as much as I have. I really appreciate you being here and enjoying my sense of humor and the way I'm telling stories. I feel like the more I'm doing this, the more I'm getting better at it and being more comfortable with just being the sassy one that I am. So yeah, please consider subscribing to be able to see my awesome faces, these amazing sunglasses I wore, and to bring history to life with all the awesome visuals I'm finding. Yeah, but if you are enjoying me and what I'm doing here, consider liking and leaving a review. It would help a lot. And also find me on Twitter and TikTok. They'll be linked below, and all the resources, if you want to see those, will also be linked below. That's something I'm really trying to do. And yeah, so with that, until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your night, an awesome weekend, and goodbye.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. Back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, want you to